Across time, our people, our cultures, our languages and our lands have always been connected as one. Language is sacred to us, and when spoken to the animals and plants, to the skies and the rivers, they hear and respond, creating a deep, rich bond. The land gave birth to language and is our connection to country and culture. Deeply rooted in our identity, it is a part of who we are as a people and ties us to our kinship and our ancestors. But in the past, government policies forcibly disrupted our way of life and silenced the practice of our language. Our old people were not allowed to speak, and our languages were torn from us. We've cried many tears for this loss. But our languages lived on in country and were held safe and kept secret by our elders until it was time for them to be spoken once again. Slowly our elders began working to reawaken, record and pass on language knowledge within our communities and across generations. Then in 2017, a group were invited to speak language in the New South Wales Parliament for the very first time. And that very same day, the Aboriginal Language Act was passed to help nurture and grow Aboriginal languages in New South Wales. Soon after, the Aboriginal Languages Trust was set up to connect with communities and help revitalise language. In 2021, the Trust spoke with communities to better understand what they needed to support their language work and to reclaim language. After listening to communities, the Trust committed to a 5-year plan focused on increasing language funding and resources. Language is like a song that carries our stories and our knowledge. Language makes us strong. When we know our culture and our identity, we thrive in all areas of life. Language is how we listen to country and its stories. The majority of Indigenous languages still spoken in Australia are considered critically endangered, but we know they are alive and growing in our communities. Our language is who we are.
Thank you everyone for joining us here tonight for the Languages Alive, Culture Thrives speaker event. I am Claire McHugh. I'm a Gamilaroi Dunghutti person and I am the Executive Director with the Aboriginal Languages Trust. You just heard a little bit about who the Aboriginal Languages Trust is and how we came to be, why we exist. You'll hear shortly from a couple of our, a board member and our Deputy Chair who will speak a little bit more on that. We are here tonight in collaboration with the Museums of History New South Wales to have a really engaging and exciting discussion about access to archives, which may not sound too sexy, but it's actually really, really critical. Hey, some people might disagree with me on the panel and in the audience tonight, but yeah, access to archives for First Nations people is really, really fundamental and critical in helping us to revive languages, particularly languages which have been sleeping for some time. So yeah, we are excited to be here tonight to have this discussion. We're here obviously with a panel of Aboriginal language practitioners and leaders in the work that they do. Very excited to have this panel tonight. And yeah, we'll dive into that shortly. Sorry, I'm just reading. I'm actually filling in tonight. I'm going to make it look like I'm not, but I am filling in for our panel facilitator, Sarah Kelly, who unfortunately was caught up in a bit of the traffic as a result of what's happened on the other side of the city, which is a little bit sad, but we're glad you could all make it. So, yeah, I'm not going to keep rattling on. I'm going to invite Clark and Kathy? Clark and Kathy up. You're not getting out of it. Yes, so Kathy Trindle, who is the Deputy Chair of the Aboriginal Languages Trust, has, strong Gomeroi-yina, as she will describe herself and often does, has an extensive career and background in education, but I'm not going to prattle on. I'll let Kathy introduce herself, and we've got Clark Webb also, who is Gumbaynggirr. Maybe some other stuff mixed in there, Gumbaynggirr, but and Clark is one of our board members and is really one of the founding members of the Gumbaynggirr Freedom School up in Coffs Harbour. Anyone who's kind of a little bit familiar, it's the first Aboriginal bilingual school in New South Wales, and it's going great guns. And it is a community-led, community-driven initiative that really just thrives basically on the blood, sweat and tears of that community. So, but over to you guys. I'll let you do a bit more of an introduction of yourselves and, dropping paper and acknowledge us to country. Thank you.
Yamagaba Buliwi, Naya Gid, Catherine Trindle, Gomeroi Marayina, Wallabiaga Nudampa, Blue Danganil, Nadabaradi, Naringlala Walela Na, Atanga, Tawathri. Naya, Winningai Madan, Naya, Winningai Gadigul New, Governinda, and also Madawa. So I've just acknowledged that today I'm standing on the traditional homelands and unceded lands of the Gadigal Nation, and I pay my humblest respects to those that have gone before us, those that walk with us, and those that will come after us. I am a very proud Gomeroi Marayina from northwestern New South Wales. I'm reminded that I'm a visitor to this country, and doing so I acknowledge each and every one of you who belong to this country, those who are visitors to this country, just like myself. And I also acknowledge the amount of beautiful environment that we've walked into. You've got the seas, you've got the sand, you've got everything down here, so it's just a pretty amazing place to be in. So I acknowledge that I'm from the black soil plains, so when I put my feet onto the sand, it's absolutely amazing. So this is a pretty special place to be, and so I just want to acknowledge not only country, but I also want to acknowledge each and every one of you who have made a good choice to be here this evening to listen to this remarkable panel and to join us. But I'm going to hand over now to Clark, who will also give you a welcome as well, or acknowledgement too as well. Sorry.
Tolong utilin yang jaga gue lah, yamna Gumbaynggirr dari, na bagian jungle jangan jangan ila gili junjiri ninung bala, ni bandigai nawa, wagin miral. Ni ala jogor gara nyai gini bandigai jalan gal girwa. Engrum wagin work bing dari jalambo. Jan junjiri irali umbala, ari irali jo bidimbang nawa bimbi pala. Jan jalan galu jurang omaga nawa Moyabangila, Galajan Girwa, Jalangal Girwa, Guying a gay, Engram Gundi Nawa, Engram Gulagundi Junibingo, Nariwagan Darie, Niamandigang Nawa Mirar, Nawa being Gunaway, Gunawa Ruin Dariway. So that last little bit is when our language thrive. What is it? Languages thrive. No, sorry, languages alive, culture thrives. So just this bit. But Gumbenga, I'm also Bunjalang. Unfortunately, I don't know much of Bunjalang language at all. But Gumbenga, and to me, in my opinion, language is our most important part of our being as Guri people, as Murri people, as Aboriginal people, and that's why it's so important that we work hard. And when we work hard, we also need to reflect and look backwards towards our elders who had the foresight to make sure that our languages remain strong for us today. And so some of our elders in the early days, they recorded on recorders, what do you call them? Not a radio. The way I translate it was a radio, but cassettes and that. And Moyabungi is actually a phone, but so I said phone. Obviously, no phones in those days to record on, but they recorded on those things. Some of our elders, despite the genocide, still remained strong in their language and therefore spoke to their children, their Junubin, and made sure that their Junubin spoke their language despite the genocide that was happening all around them. And then some of our elders recorded their language with explorers and researchers, and those researchers wrote those languages down. And it's part of the work that is going to be spoken about tonight, really important part of the journey of revitalisation of language.
Look, I'd also like to acknowledge Simon Draper, who is with us this evening, and Simon is the Secretary of the New South Wales Premier's Department. The New South Wales Aboriginal Languages Trust, as we know, the Act came into being in 2017, and it's actually quite significant because government legislation denied us who we were, denied us our languages, but there's an actual Act in Parliament that acknowledges that the very first voices that were ever spoken on country were our voices of our elders and our people who have gone before us. But their voices remain everywhere. I'm woken up every day by the Gugagara who tells me to wake up at a rather earlier time and then go into sleep. But it's everywhere we travel. When we traverse across this country, our languages are there. They are alive, they are striving, and they will continue to do that with the work that has been done by the New South Wales Languages Trust and under the leadership of Claire. Aboriginal Languages Week came about because we thought, you know what, we've always been here, there's weeks for everything, why don't we have an Aboriginal Languages Week? And so the Trust putting out applications for some grants, and our communities embraced it, and they are out there celebrating our languages, and our languages will always be here. And the really important thing about the work that Clark does is that his school teaches our languages from the very beginning. So all the kids speak is languages. So I'm very proud of that because my grandson is going to be, anyway. But that's just a proud grandmother coming out of me. So we aid, the Trust aids in the growth of nurturing the Aboriginal languages by responding to the aspirations of the community. And part of what we do as a board, both myself as the deputy and along with Clark, is that you may have heard the term truth-telling. Well, we've always told the truth. It really is about truth listening and enacting on it. So what we actually do is that our teams go out and engage with our community, they listen, and they bring that feedback to us, and then we can actually put that into policies which support us don't alienate us, but support the growth of our languages to the point that where they are now. So, you know, these just now, you know, there are communities right across New South Wales that have got family fun days and performances and lessons and workshops. And sometime when you do an acknowledgement to country, it isn't a performance. We don't do a performance to acknowledgement or a welcome to country. It's cultural protocol, and we have to ensure that we continue those protocols. And part of the Act and this team allows us to do that. But I'm pretty excited for this evening, and then I'll hand over to Clark to say his final words in terms of this. But tonight, this panel is that for so often, we as a people, as a human race, have been locked away in archives. And our voices have been silenced for so long. So this gives us the opportunity to embrace it, engage it, and it's going to be very sensitive, and it's going to be extremely difficult for those people who are working in that space, because they're going to come across so many things and atrocities, but they're also going to come across so many things that tell us, like our narratives and our stories and the community tells us, that we've always been here and we're always going to be. So enjoy this evening, and this is a great facility for us to be able to do that. So, you know, thank you to those guys that do the work behind the scenes there too.
And one day, Languages Week will be bigger than the knockout.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring my chair forward because I feel like I'm in a really straight line and I can't see the panel members. Thank you, Kathy and Clark, and just I appreciate the shout out, but I really do feel that the work of the Languages Trust is really, really driven, and the vision of what we do, it does come up from community, but it's the board of the Languages Trust. It's a 100% Aboriginal led government agency. It's not just an advisory board, it's a governing board that has teeth, it has functions, it has really heavy responsibilities and obligations to ensure that what gift we've been given through this legislation with the New South Wales government is really delivering outcomes for community. But it's definitely guided by an amazing board, and I'm really, really lucky to be blessed to be working with an amazing board. So just putting that out there. I do love my work. So I'm now going to introduce our panel members tonight. So we've got Gulwanyang Moran, we've got Nathan Sentance, we've got Kirsty Beller, getting all the names right. And I have got some bios here, just like an amazing, real amazing lineup tonight. Now I'm going to talk you guys up, so sit back. So Gulwanyang, proud Biribay Dangari woman. She is a speaker of the Gulwanyang language and very passionate about the work she does in community. I know because we've had many, many conversations. We are extremely lucky, and Museums of History New South Wales are extremely lucky to have secured such a powerhouse of energy and knowledge and passion to really drive a project that we work in close partnership with, which is the Access to Archives for First Nations People. That project was really, we were discussing this outside, was a bit of a thing that came about when we were doing consultations through the Languages Trust around developing our first 5-year strategic plan and meeting with the mob from Museums of History New South Wales. We identified that we had a common interest around access to archives. Museums of History New South Wales were really keen to increase their Aboriginal workforce for reasons which we'll probably delve into this evening. We'll understand some of the challenges around, you know, a mob working in cultural institutions, particularly in this space, can be quite challenging, and there was a real desire by Museums of History New South Wales to want to sort of see what we could do to drive that forward a little bit. And there was also a need to try and get access to really delve into some of the archives that hadn't been touched before. And we were really keen to dive into those archives to try and find cultural information and family information and information on mob, but most importantly, vital language information that could help us drive language revitalisation. To Gulwanyang, who's with us, she applied for the role and secured it luckily for us, but it has just really driven that project in an amazing way. And over the last 2 years, I think it's one of the projects that I think the Trust has engaged in. I'm proud of a lot of the projects the Trust has engaged in, but this one in particular has just seen some really amazing outcomes and results, and I'm just fascinated by what it is that you guys do. So
it's actually my 1 year anniversary today. I started officially 1 year ago. Yeah.
Well done. Yeah, congratulations. So really going to be fascinated to hear all of the stuff you've been doing in the last 12 months. Nathan is an archival decolonist. And is really committed to ensuring that First Nations stories are told and governed by First Nations people. I'm a very handsy talker, I won't bang my microphone. And is really, committed to making sure that communities have kind of oversight around governing how those stories are told. And has a really kind of a long background working in cultural institutions. I think we were yarning about this. I first met you when you were working over at the Australian Museum. Prior to that, you were with the library, New South Wales Library, and now you're over with Powerhouse Museum. An interesting kind of little linkage to some of the way in which this project around access to archives came about was one of the things we were talking about, like, how many black archivists are there? And at that time, there were 4 in New South Wales, and only one of them was still working in that space, and I'm pretty sure it was you. And that kind of told me everything I needed to know, that there's some fundamental challenges and roadblocks that we need to overcome to ensure that mob feel that they have a safe space to be able to build careers in cultural institutions. So I'm super excited you're here tonight as well, Nathan, because I think there's a lot we can learn from you about that stuff. And Sister Kirsty Beller, hello again. So excited to have Kirsty. Kirsty is a project lead with the Gajaga Foundation. The Gajaga Foundation is leading the reclamation of the Dharawal language in the Laperouse community. You would describe yourself, I think, and I'll let you guys kind of describe yourselves shortly. I'm doing a big, massive introduction of you all, but as like a Laperouse Aboriginal person, basically, is what I think you would describe yourself as. It's what most Lapa mob would describe themselves as. And Kirsty's basically involved in the language revitalisation and reclamation work around research, community projects, language classes and lessons. I know you deliver them to my girls, and you do some of those classes in the schools and in community. And you're really passionate about ensuring Dharawal language and your community's stories and knowledge are at the front of the decision making in the Laperouse Aboriginal community. So this is the panel. And what I'm going to do, as I flick over to make sure I've got my notes in order, is, sorry everyone, like I said, I am a blow-in tonight. Really hand over to you guys just to do a little bit of an intro as well. So I know I've done a big one for you, but Gulwanyang, I'll hand to you first. Do you want to introduce yourself?
First of all, thanks so much, Auntie Kathy and Bart, for doing that beautiful acknowledgement. Nata Gulwanyang, Nata Birapai Dangari, Gurwagang Galban. I'm Gulwanyang, a very proud Birapai and Dangari woman, and I also pay my respects to country and the old people who've cared for this country since time immemorial. I'm handsy too, and I'm not great with mics, so we'll see how we go with this. So our people are the oldest archivists in the world. They're the oldest conservators in the world. and recorders of information as well, and organisers and distributors of information. And I want to acknowledge that too. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that too. And I wear multiple hats in the languages space, but I get the absolute privilege and honour of managing an amazing team in Museums of History New South Wales, which some are in the audience tonight, so shout out to you guys. And we're helping to facilitate better discoverability and accessibility with respect to the State Archives collection. And we do this in partnership with Aboriginal Languages Trust. And look, I've worked in language revitalisation with respect to my own footprint, Gatang, for over a decade now. And that footprint is kind of like up near Point Plummer area, Port Macquarie, all the way down past Port Stephens to the south and all the way west at Gloucester and the Great Dividing Range on that western border. And I manage a local Aboriginal Languages Corporation called Gatanga Wakoda, which means to being Gatang as one. And I manage or secretariat a local language governance group, Juga Wakoda, as well. And I also teach Gatang language with TAFE on Tuesday nights. I like to spend my nights teaching as well. And I also sit on a National Language Policy Partnership group that's actually secretariat by First Languages Australia and Office of the Arts. And look, I work so hard in this space and I wear so many hats because it takes one generation to lose a language and it takes 3 generations for that language to come back. And if I was honest with respect to Gatang, we'd be looking at 6. And there's a lot of hard work that actually goes into that. And I don't want my babies, and I've got 6 of them, and their babies to have to work this hard for effectively what is their birthright. And that's it from me.
Thank you. I was going to add you're a mother of 6 as well. So when you've got spare time, you do all the other things.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Gulwanyang. Nathan, I'll let you introduce yourself now.
And I'd just like to echo Gulwanyang and thank Kathy and Clark for acknowledging country at the start, and also just to say, Yuru Marong Nundugi, Nathan Sentance, Nadi, Waraji Gibi Baladu, Yindamalaja, Garagul Norambangu, Yindamalaja, Garagul Mujigangu, Yindamalaja, Nadi, Mujigangu. And I only know like a little bit of Wiradjuri, and that's thanks to people like Uncle Stan Grant and and cousins that are learning the language that I can Facebook message them all the time saying, how do you say this? And but I'm a Wiradjuri fella. My family's traditionally from Mudgee, New South Wales. So I guess like the far northern part of Wiradjuri country. But they got moved to Wella and then eventually went to Bateman's Bay. But I grew up on Darkinjung country on the New South Wales Central Coast, where my dad was involved in the local land council and the local medical service, and it's really actually how I got into archives. When I was about 18, the Darkinjung Local Aboriginal Land Council had never sorted their business records, and they were in breach of the State Records Act. You actually need to, So they basically hired an archivist to do it. The archivist said, "This is too much work. I need an assistant." And my dad said, "Nathan's not doing anything, get Nathan." And that's basically how I started in archives, and I've been very privileged to sort of build on that work. And from there, I got to work at the State Library of New South Wales, which, if you don't know, is the oldest library in Australia. And I got to work under the mentorship of Ronald Briggs and Melissa Jackson, who were there, who have been Indigenous librarians there since 1991, doing a lot of the hard yards that I get to be lucky to build upon. Later, Dr. Kirsten Thorpe joined, and she was a strong mentor to me. And I guess that was my first experience about, like records and accessing, for language revitalisation, because we had a project called, I think problematically titled the Rediscovering Indigenous Languages Project, where we digitised a lot of language material and went out to community to let them know that we have it. And that showed me a lot of the benefit of getting these materials out to community, but also to made me consider more about the barriers that community face in accessing it, but also the problematic nature of collections. And I always say this one story, and if you've ever heard me talk before, I apologise because I always tell this story. But really early on in my library career, Ronald and Melissa were really nice, and they would, whenever Mob would come into the collections, they would invite me along, even though I was, when I first started, my job was just to put away books and get books. But every time Mob would visit, and the State Library actually has the private missionary collections, so like the missionaries' private papers, so we'd have Mob visit them and access them for family history reasons. And I remember one auntie reading a record, and she was so excited, she was like, oh, that's me. This is me. And she was reading the record, and the record said this auntie needed additional care because she broke her arm. And she was like, hold on a second, I've actually never broken my arm in my life. I will take an x-ray right now to prove it. And it really, that was like one of those moments where I was like, whoa, this record is in this collection where it potentially becomes the official narrative of New South Wales, but Arnie's lived experience is not. And it's like, this is the place where history gets written, like, and there's so many voices that weren't included in that telling. So I guess that sort of put me on the trajectory I've been on, and luckily from there I went to the Australian Museum, and I was under the mentorship of Laura McBride, who's the director at the Australian Museum and does incredible work. And now I'm at the Powerhouse as Head of Collections First Nations, working across Powerhouse Parramatta, Powerhouse Ultimo, the Sydney Observatory, and Powerhouse Castle Hill. So we have 4 sites, and again, it's just how do we sort of make sure we're telling Mob stories appropriately, and how we can sort of also support Mob, because or you're just hearing some deadly people before us and Gulwanyang doing deadly stuff outside of the work. It's like, how do we also do cool things in our institutions, but make sure that Mob are doing cool things on the ground are also supported, and sometimes get out of the way. When they're doing cool stuff, just figure out a way to support them and not interfere with what they're doing.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Dark and Jung Land Council, for laying the foundation for establishing your career. Deadly. Kirsty.
Nagambi Naigang Kirsty, Gamaringai Darulunga. Hello, my name is Kirsty. I'm speaking to you in Darul. I'm a Darul person from the Laparus Aboriginal community. So our country goes from Sydney Harbour down to the Shoalhaven River, as far west into Campbelltown and Appin. As Claire said, I'm a project lead at the Gujaga Foundation, and we aim to instill a strong sense of identity into our Lapa kids.
Yeah, you were very short. We had to con Kirsty to be here tonight. She's a little bit shy. I'm gonna rope it out of you tonight. Okay. But yeah, the work. I think you undersell the work that you do, and it's. I think your voice here tonight on the panel, Kirsty, is a really critical one, because it grounds the work that Gulwanyang and Nathan does in the institutions into why it's so critical and important, and what the practical application is of the work that's being done in the background. And yeah, you guys over there are doing such amazing work, and I know, because my daughter's Darawal, and they've benefited from having the opportunity, which not many kids do, and not many communities get the opportunity to be able to kind of come up through childcare, with language being at the forefront, and having the opportunity to transition over to school and have the community leading language reclamation, delivering that program back into school, so they're still kind of getting it. I think the golden star of this is the immersion experience that the Gingana Freedom School provides to the Gumbangi mob. But yeah, there's so many different experiences. So really excited to hear from you about the community aspect of things. So I'm going to refer to my notes again. Okay. We're going to dive into questions, and thank you everyone for your patience. We were a little bit delayed tonight. And yeah, we've got kind of like a close time on this, but we tend to like a good yarn us mob, and we don't really follow normal time. We do go over all the time. So yeah, thank you. So really, my first question is for you, Gulwanyang, and it's really around archives and empowerment. How do you see the role of archival resources in empowering First Nations communities to reclaim their language? And can you share specific examples from your work?
Yeah, sure. So archival resources have so much potential in the revitalisation context, particularly when it's First Nations people who are accessing them and analysing those materials. That's a really, really important aspect of it. Some of the finds that we've had with respect to the First Nations Community Access to Archives project with Western Sydney Records Centre and with respect to the State Archives collection, you know, often you'll see isolated words, often you'll see comparative word lists, you know, it might be head, shoulders, knees, body parts, or it might be family or kin terms, but some of the big finds is, as an example actually in the case out the front there, and that's where you actually get to see the whole grammatical structure of the language. When we find those, you know, you think about language revitalisation context, we're running on the smell of an oily rag, we don't have a lot of resourcing, and if you find something like that and give that back to community, that can save years and years of research, it can save years and years of resourcing as well. And it's not just, I guess, the amount of what you find, it's also the value of what you find, right? Like even if it is just one word, that can be incredibly powerful. So when I first started with Museums of History New South Wales, actually my first 2 weeks wasn't in here at Museums of History, it was actually down at Paper and Talk, which is a program that was run by IATSIS. And what you do when you go down there in this program, they kind of trot out all your language materials, anything that's got an Auslan code tag to it, right? So trot it out on the trolley and, you know, you start going through those materials. And I'll tell you a bit of a story. So in my family group, so I'm Dangari and Birapai, right? And on the Dangari side, our nation totem is Guragan, which is the praying mantis. And on the Birapai side, it's Gulwanyang, which is the grey-nosed shark. And then we've got bloodline totems in our family group. So we've got Gula, the koala, and then we've got the bass, like the Australian bass, the fish. And we've got a responsibility to these totems. We've got to look after them, look after the environment they live in. They're part of our identity. And so when I was first born, you get a personal totem too, right? My mum gave me like the butcher's bird, a butcher bird. You know what a pied butcher bird is? They got beautiful song, right? And I yarn to all these kin, like if you ever watch my Facebook, like I live in the bush, so I'm just yarning up to all of these kin every day. And so like in the Gutang language, we didn't have a word for butcher bird. We had Darwin, which was a bush bird, like this generic term. And I'm always singing a Darwin, Darwin, like, you know, talking to this bird. And anyone who knows me, like he would sit on the seat in shopping centres, sing to me at train stations. I've got video of this occurring, right? And so me and my Gimby, Jaslee Davis, who actually works at the Languages Trust, we were there at Paper and Talk, and we're pouring through these materials and we're getting quite frustrated. You know, you go through a box of material, you might get to, you know, the last bundle in the box and you're up to page 199, then you might find one word that relates to the Birapai language. So it's not at a granular level that its metadata tagging is applied. That's incredibly frustrating. We weren't finding kind of anything new with respect to what was already sourced within our dictionary. And then lo and behold, I found this comparative word list with Gutang and Dangari language, and it was by Hot Knot, I think. And there was the word there for butcher bird, which was wort. And like that for me, that I can now name him, I can name myself, I can name my identity. That is so significant for my family group, for my community, just to have that one word. So that's the power of a word with respect to archival materials. And look, it's not just paper-based archival materials. Country is archive as well. Our songs, our stories are archived. They're living archives. When we're practicing these, we're practicing our archives. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, I really love how you, your story kind of centres language in identity and the sort of strength that can give back to just through discovering one word in language, like the uplift it gives in terms of identity through language, which I think is really quite beautiful.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. Nathan, I'm going to you next. And this one's really around, I guess, community engagement. And as an archival decolonist, I love saying that. I want that title, an archival. I'm adding decolonist to my title somewhere. But in all seriousness, as an archival decolonist, how do you advocate for First Nations governance over their own stories within archival institutions? And you've got like a lot of experience in this space. And what changes have you observed in community engagement as a result?
Yeah, I guess, to be honest, as I said, I'm pretty lucky that I've been part of really good teams. So I've always been able to build on work that other people have sort of already started. And, you know, even at the Powerhouse now, I'm working, one of our guiding principles is our, you know, our Indigenous cultural and intellectual property protocols that sort of were made in 2016 with Marcus Hughes, who used to work there, and Terry Janke. And just having that and just being able to refer to that, because one of the principles is Indigenous people have the right to be the primary interpreters of their cultural heritage. So I can just refer to that all the time. So when basically when people are like, oh, but why do we need to engage with mob? I can be like, no, this is their right. This is not just a good thing to do. It's actually their right to their language. And I guess in thinking about our like sovereignty, it's like we've never ceded our sovereignty to our language, even if it's in these collections, our cultural heritage, even if it's in our collections, in these collections. And I guess that's one of the things that I guess, one of the tensions that will always be with collections, I guess, is ownership. And I remember, and in my naivety, when I first started at the State Library, I didn't realise that if you take a photo of mob and it goes to the State Library collection, it's like, it could be owned by the State Library collection, and if it's not, the copyright is owned by the photographer. And I'm just like, but they're taking photos of mob or mob cultural practices. Same with writing it down. Working with language, I always thought one of the saddest things was that even though it's awesome that these language resources exist, but I was always like, why would you, if you were writing, you know, a paper on a Wabakal language, that you have to cite Threlkeld? But I'm like, but Threlkeld got it from, you know, Irvine. Yeah. I was always like, and even when people aren't named, I'm like, we know that's Wiradjuri, so can't we cite that that's just Wiradjuri knowledge that's in this source? So one of the things I did work on just recently with some Melbourne unis was actually making a citation guide that could cite Indigenous knowledge, where you could sort of circumvent the white person that recorded it. Well, you still sort of name that's where you can find it, but you sort of say that the actual owner of that knowledge is Wiradjuri people if it's not named. But if it is named, have the actual named person be the centre of how that's cited. So I guess that's one of the ways. And I guess you know, even though I've been in libraries, archives and museums for about 17 years, I feel still very new to the space. And one of the things I guess I have changed, which is good, but it's still, you know, there's still more work to happen. It's really good to see more senior roles being created in cultural institutions. And I know that's not be all and end all because there's so much work, but you know, there's Peter White in the room and he's got a senior role. Gulwanyang's got a senior role. When I first started at the Australian Museum, me and Laura McBride were both at I was a 3-4 and she was a 5-6, and she was one of the highest roles in there. And now she's the director of the Australian Museum, director of First Nations Australian Museum. Yeah. But just those sorts of changes are good. There's still heaps more work in the sense that I think we were yarning beforehand where even there's a lot of willingness in our organisations, which is really good, but we still need more resourcing, mostly just in terms of people. We just need more people. And yeah, and again too, we need to make sure that we're always on the ground as well, because I guess one of the issues too is we get so caught up in being an institution, or like for us, you know, Sydney, that we're not yarning to mob on the ground who are doing incredible work. And yeah, so yeah.
Thank you, Nathan. I think, yeah, it is, there is absolutely a lot of goodwill and good intention around what's happening in these spaces at the moment, and we're only limited by how far we can spread ourselves thin to do the work. And a lot of what happens, and I see it at the moment, it's how would you... the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is such a big focus at the moment on languages, and I've only been kind of in this languages space. I'm not a language speaker. Obviously, am married into a community of language speakers and people who have been deep in this space for more than 20 years doing the work. and I see the work definitely has been driven by communities over many, many decades, from well before the Language Act and the Language Trust, and it's been blood, sweat and tears. And we've definitely seen like a much more investment in this space in the last 5 or 10 years than we've seen ever. Keeping up, I think communities, but also our sorts of institutions and agencies keeping up with the pace of the growth and the pace of the demand that's coming out of all of this interest and at the moment. So, but the passion's definitely there, right, from community. It's always been there and it always will be there, whether the money is there or not. But it's very, very nice to have the resources and the investment to support work that is really critical to our people, our wellbeing and our identities. Thank you, Nathan. Cultural practices, Kirsty. I want to discuss with you how revitalising language and reclaiming language has influenced cultural practices and storytelling traditions in your community.
Yeah, so in Lapa, we were ground zero for colonisation, and I think a lot of people assume that our culture disappeared quite quickly, that our language disappeared quite quickly. We continued to live quite traditional up until the protectionism era. My great uncle was head of the oyster leases in Kurnell. Like, an Aboriginal man was told from the Holt family that he was able to take charge of an oyster lease due to his skilled fishing, practices, like many of the men in my community. And I think that because our families were so staunch in knowing who they are, knowing their identity, knowing their language, that we were still able to continue our cultural practices, which in turn led to the fact that we still had our language. We never actually lost that. It kept on going. Yeah, and I do, I know, like I've heard stories about the people in the generation before our generation were still speaking language. Yeah, so my grandmother remembers her parents speaking Dharawal. They both spoke fluent Dharawal language. Her mother also spoke fluent Dunghutti. She was moved from the south coast up to Burnt Bridge, where she was born. And they remember their parents speaking language. I grew up with words, not sentences. My grandmother's first language was Dharawal, like many of the women in my community. And that wasn't too long ago either. She was born in 1934. So she was a fluent speaker when she was younger, but obviously that got lost due to the protectionism era. Yeah, and that fear of speaking language, sharing the language, and it's heartbreaking to know that that language was there, but it was hidden for fear of repercussion around removal of children and all of that, and so understanding that it was so close, but there's still a need to rely on records, written records, recordings. Are there recordings of Dharawal language that exist? How have the recordings and written material, and how has that informed some of the reclamation work that you guys are doing? We have records from actually the 60s of people speaking fluently. There's a lot of assumptions made in those tapes. We hear often our own people correcting the linguist, I guess, in one of the tapes. So the word for La Perouse, the place, is Gurwal. It means bush pigeon. And the linguist on the tape says, "Oh, guru, that's the word for fish," and he's like, "No, like what are you talking about?" That's the word for the place of Laparus. It means bush pigeon, which we don't unfortunately get in Lapa anymore. Yeah, so we have quite a few tapes. That's how we've learnt our sentence structure. If we didn't have those tapes, we wouldn't know that. We would only know words. So that's quite valuable to our community.
And you do hear that a lot amongst different communities around the different, and I think, Clark, you were mentioning a bit of this as well, but around the different types of information that's available, whether or not there's only one or two words. Like you do have some communities, I think, the Anawon community, listening to Callo, some of the videos that we've been sharing on our socials has taken me back to our languages gathering that we had back in 2022, and it is you. Some people are just relying on a handful of words, and how do you string that all back together? And they'll be looking at communities that have hours of recordings, and not jealous, like, because we don't get jealous of one another for having those sorts of opportunities, but just thinking how amazing it would be to have that. And so the level of loss, not loss, I shouldn't say loss, because language is not lost, it's there somewhere, which is why we do these projects, searching archives, and we talk about languages being sleeping and they're just needing to be rewoken. But the level of what's experienced across different languages communities in New South Wales, and there's no less than 35 different language groups, and then when you start to break that down into different dialects, it's so diverse, and the different journeys that communities are going on to reclaim and revive language. No, there's not a one size fits all. But what I do find really amazing is how communities are so willing in this space, and we see it at the languages gatherings, and when communities get together and network is, what are you mob doing? Oh, what's this? What's that word? How are you sharing your information? How are you transmitting it? And like, there's such an eagerness of our communities and our people to want to share, learn and grow from each other in this space, and I think it's really quite beautiful. Can I go back to the questions? And this one is really for all of the panel, and it's around those barriers and I guess what the barriers and solutions are from your perspectives in terms of First Nations communities and what they're facing in accessing archival material. What are some of the strategies we could be putting in place to overcome these challenges? And to really enhance the impact of archival resources to help support language preservation efforts. So,
I'm happy to go first if you want.
Go, Gulwanyang.
It's kind of my jam at the moment. So a lot of the barriers, like, first of all, they're with paper-based materials, like those manuscripts. Have you ever read some of the handwriting?
They're so hard to read.
Pretty tricky. The location of the materials, a lot of the time, like archival centres, museums and stuff are in major cities. So, a lot of mob out in regional areas, if they're not digitised, they don't have access to these materials. And that's another huge barrier, is that a lot of the materials aren't digitised, so therefore they're not accessible, let alone to the standard that they need to be digitised for proper analysis. So in language revitalisation, or in when language is represented, we use a lot of diacritics, right? So the dot on a page, if that doesn't lift off the page in the digitisation process, that can have huge impacts to how you might pronounce that word. You could have, in a revitalisation context, someone's now pronouncing a word wrong for X amount of years until that's kind of corrected, or there's more research done. So there's so much work that really needs to be done in this space, and with respect to resourcing, which we've all kind of echoed and talked about, we don't have many ongoing First Nations archivists that are in cultural institutions. So workforce is an issue. Funding to have the materials digitised to a high specification is the issue. And if cultural institutions really want to get kind of real and be responsive with respect to truth telling and everything that we kind of want to do, there needs to be resourcing in this area. And First Nations people and communities, by putting, like, you know, we need to kind of put our money where our mouth is as cultural institutions and really resource that space, because it's integral work and it should be BAU. And if country is archive, how are we able to access country as well? Like, that's something that I continually think about, and I just keep thinking about, like, a lot of Indigenous peoples, like all over the world, and that have experienced genocide or cultural genocide with respect to a lot of our heritage, both tangible and intangible cultural heritage, and even, you know, some of the stuff that's kind of going on at the moment. I can't sit here and speak on this, you know, these topics without kind of saying something about that, and the barriers, you know, that are faced kind of all over. So, you know, that situation is kind of, it's kind of horrifying, and I think about the years to come, and, you know, that cultural heritage not being there for peoples as well. So, yeah, lots of barriers in this space, but there are lots of solutions, things that we do have control over, and a lot of that at the moment looks like resourcing and workforce in the space.
Your thoughts, Nathan? You got any?
I'll just sort of probably just repeat what you say. No, I think it really is just, I guess, like, there's many barriers. I guess, as you're saying, geographically that is a barrier. Like, we ask mob to, for the most times, come to us. Basically, you need to come to us to access this material. It's not super easy to do. And then even then, when you get to places like, I remember when I first went to the State Library, and I was there for a job interview, and I was scared, like, because it's this big sandstone building, and then the first thing you get greeted by is a security guard, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm even allowed to be here, like, and I think that, and I guess there's even barriers too, that our collections are dispersed. Like, I've worked with, you know, like the Kinchler boys, and they'll be like, some of their records are at the National Museum, some of their records are at the State Records, some of their records are over here, and it's like, they shouldn't have to know the difference between all these organisations. They just want to find their stuff, like, and I think that, so there's a lot of that. So there's that issue, and I guess, and I'm going to steal, like, an example from when we were yarning before, like, and you spoke about it too, like when you went to IATSIS, and they brought out all this material, and you have to read through all of it to get to just like a few words, and it's like, there needs to be better cataloguing and sort of making people sort of doing some of that work beforehand, but, you know, still making it accessible, and also just to be, one of the things, I guess, museums have trouble with, well, I'm going to speak from museums connected to archives as well, a little bit, is because we're kind of, you know, archives sort of come from government a lot of the times, but like museums, we sort of come from academia. We're like academic adjacent. I feel like because of that, and because of Western academia is very sort of like detached and not emotional. Like, you know, I feel like then that's wrong, and I feel like we need to create space for emotion, because accessing records can be super joyous. Like, it can be exciting to see your mum's name, or read a letter that your family member wrote. But at the same time, it can be tragic to know what your family went through, or, you know, to read some of the, we were young before, but like, you know, to read some of the records that have language, you might have to read words written by a guy who was also committing massacres. You know, you have to read, so you have to engage in sort of really heavy material. So there needs to be space for that, and that needs to be part of how you provide access, is also how you're providing care after people like access it, or how they leave. So I think it's thinking about care and thinking about emotion, I think, and I think the institutions need to cater for emotion anyway, and also just resourcing to I remember hearing a talk by Callum, who you just referenced before, and he was basically saying that providing access to mob shouldn't just be seen as a good thing to do. It's actually restitution for taking these languages in the first place. Like, you actually owe it to mob. So it's not just a good thing to do. It's actually what you should be doing, because what previously happened was wrong. So yeah.
I think just echoing on what was said, we also don't know where to access certain information. We don't actually know everything that's out there. A lot of the time there are things put in wrong collections. For example, we have found in Chinese garden records, we found images of our old people in there. So it's just, we need to build those relationships with the institutions. My community have actually been quite lucky. We work very closely with the State Library, with the Powerhouse Museum. We work very closely with lots of universities who are able to give us access, to tell us what's there. A lot of the time communities don't actually know what is out there.
Yeah, I think it's something that we at the Trust, when we were doing our consultations for the 5-year strategic plan, it was a common theme, and that's why I think it became a big priority for the work that we do. It's like one of the pillars is access to archives, and it's kind of made its way through to our work that we do under Closing the Gap, under the socioeconomic outcome area 16, and it's continuing to be a really big focus, because sometimes that access can be the key to unlocking the pathway to language revival. And it is it's complex navigating the cultural institution environment, like in terms of just access to whether it might be one cultural institution, let alone, as you were describing, there's multiple records kept across multiple institutions. And if you're just one or two individuals in your community who are volunteering your time to do language work because it's something you're super passionate about doing, you're expected to be able to traverse all of these sort of gateways to unlock that information. I guess, what's a solution to that? How can we unlock that barrier in terms of simplifying? Is it digitisation? Is it, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think the discoverability is a huge issue with cultural institutions, right? So you say we don't know what cultural institutions have. Cultural institutions don't know what they have.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't know what they have. Like, that's why it's so important, this project that we're doing in Museums of History New South Wales, because we are literally doing a page turn, and the State Archives collection, it has 14 million items. And these can be like something like this, to big bundles like this, to big boxes. Like, my team could speak to it in that they can spend a week on an item, they could spend a month on an item, and these are pages of manuscript writing again. You're having to interpret that, you're having to analyse it, you're having to apply subjects to it as well, like metadata tagging. So we're not just looking for language in terms of we're applying Auslan codes to with respect to our indexing and how we're going about that. We're actually looking for things that we can apply subject terms to. So if you're someone that's Gomeroi and you want to look up sky stories on Gomeroi country, you should be able to type into a catalogue astronomy and look at the Auslan code and be able to locate that information. But at a page level, not just at an item where it pulls up the record, you should be able to find the image of the page that it's actually on. Because of that frustration that we experience, I'm like, if we're going to do this project, we need to do it well, and we need to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for community to actually discover what's within the collection. But it takes a lot of manpower, a lot of resourcing,
Thank you. I really liked that discussion. I'll move on to the next question. We've only got a couple more, and hopefully we have time. There might be interest from the audience to ask you guys a few unplanned questions. Kirsty? Okay, Gulwanyang, this one's for you.
I feel like I've spoken a lot, Claire.
I know. Well, this one's about the role of educational initiatives. So anyone who feels like they can jump in here can jump in. Hit your buzzer? No. But what role do you believe educational initiatives play? I mean, Kirsty, you could probably answer this one as well. What role do you believe educational initiatives play in enhancing the effectiveness of language revitalisation programs within communities? Actually, I'm asking you that.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, we have a Darrell language program in our community. We teach in about 50 schools within our cultural boundary, mostly in Sydney. We teach both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students. We think it's just too valuable to lose or potentially lose again. We want everyone speaking Darrell. Everyone in Sydney, we want you to speak Darrell. So it's quite valuable for our language tutors to be able to go out into schools and teach stories and to teach language about a language that was almost lost. Yeah.
And it's an interesting point you make because you speak to different communities and not all communities are open to sharing their language for the purpose of speaking with anyone other than their language group in that community.
And I could probably add to that because that's exactly the stance that we have with respect to Gatang. So for us, like when we think about language transference, we think about like language first starts in the womb, right, with mum. It's mum speaking, it's dad speaking, a baby in the womb, and language starts in the home. It starts in the community first, and that's where we put a lot of our resourcing. We don't necessarily go within the schooling system. We want to build ourselves first. And look, like I'd give anything to have a day, with my old people under a tree immersed in language. But the reality is, in the context we're in today, we've got to meet people where they are when it comes to language revitalisation. And as language practitioners and as advocates, we need to meet people where they're at, start in the home, start in the community first, and build our capacity so as a community, we can be responsive in those formal contexts when it comes to, early childhood settings and beyond, but we need that time, we need that patience and the resourcing to build our capacity first. And that's where funding needs to go, is on the ground in communities, investing in the people that are already doing the work. And that's really, really important. And, it's not enough as language practitioners just to be teaching people language. We need to be teaching people how to teach language at the exact same time. If we're not doing that, then we're really selling ourselves short in terms of really investing in language revitalisation efforts and bringing it back quicker. We need to be teaching people how to teach language.
Yeah, that's a really amazing point, building, for want of a better way of describing it, a sector, a workforce of language speakers and teachers. And I know it's a challenge in every community and we're trying to keep up. The demand is definitely well ahead of where we're at across all communities, I think. And it's a really important point to make, is that while some communities, such as the Dharawal speaking community, feel that they're at that stage where they've reclaimed language strongly enough that they're opening the doors now and sharing it with the broader community because they're confident of the work they've done on the ground and in community, and their community are happy for it to be shared. They're definitely, it's not that one size fits all, and there's definitely different approaches by different communities. And I think the wider and broader appreciationness and desire from the wider community in Australia to want to, and it consumes not the word, but who want to appreciate language and learn language and understand the words and use words for different things. Take the time, I would say, definitely take the time to understand that we're not homogenous in terms of how we approach our cultures and our language and how they're governed and used and shared. Understand that, like I had said earlier, there's more than 35 Aboriginal languages in New South Wales. we are rebuilding our cultures, our identities and our languages after centuries of harm as a result of past government policies, and we're reclaiming all of that, and sometimes that's really grungy work. It's not easy work. It's not. It can cause conflict amongst our own communities, like around, well, where's the boundary? Whose language group? What's who? Yeah, like it's very messy work that can go on in some communities, and so understanding that if there is differences of opinion happening within our communities, that sometimes it's necessary to pause and give those communities the space and time they need to work the issues out themselves before we're kind of forced to share. That's a really important point.
Absolutely.
So I think I'm going to have a bit of a look here. What time is it? Can someone share the time with me? 7:20? We're going all right. Lose track of time when you have these yarns because they're so easy just to kind of keep going. I want to talk a little about, I guess, inspiration from elders. And I guess I'll pose it to everyone here on the panel because I know we've all been inspired by elders, but how have elders influenced your approach to community-based language instruction? And not even just the community-based language instruction, but the work that you do across each of your sectors and each of the spaces that you're operating in. And what lessons have you learned from your elders to guide the work that you're doing? Nate, you want to start?
Oh, yeah, I'll go. Yeah, no, like I think it's just, well, it's important for whatever we do, I guess, whatever revitalisation it is to be guided by community principles and to make sure that influences what we're doing and not to, I always fear of, I guess, like any sort of form of like tokenization where our culture just gets absorbed by, I guess, the colonial machine and it just becomes part of it rather than a thing that can disrupt the colonial machine or, you know, just be for us, just be for our identity and our strength and also be for country and to care for country. So, you know, I think working, like my dad is I guess my biggest influence, sadly passed earlier this year. But yeah, just he worked through the land council. He was able to do some really cool things and talk about those sort of community conflicts. He was able to, I don't know, he was one of those people that for somehow he got everyone to like him, even though all these people hate each other and call each other dogs. He was somehow able to work with all of them. And, you know, because he was, I guess, and I try my best, it's hard, I try my best to not be ego-driven and be outcome-driven, to focus on what's best for mob and, you know, not worry about myself, like, yeah. So I guess that's one of the things I learned, and one of the things I'm trying to learn is, I guess, like, Yinjamara, like, you know, the Wiradjuri philosophy of, you know, going slowly, going respectfully, and they're basically interconnected. And I guess being in some of these colonial institutions, there's so much like urgency and there's financial years and you've got to get everything done. But I'm trying my best to work on mob time because I've been in institutions and I've started to absorb institutional time. I can feel it and I'm trying to make sure I step back and embody Yinjamara, not just as a phrase but also as a practice. And also too, because, you know, for this event we acknowledge country, and I'm trying to make sure that I don't just acknowledge country with my words, that my actions, including what I do with like museums and archives, is an acknowledgement of country in action. Yeah, so yeah, I guess that's all.
Beautiful. Interesting listening to your description of your dad, because I reckon you must be a lot like him. I can see that everyone would love you in the spaces that you're in. So, Gulwanyang, how have elders, I guess, shaped or guided the work that you're doing? Who's inspiring you
Yeah. So my mum just finished her PhD actually in the use of gesture when teaching the Gatang language. And she's like much ajuyo, like using hand talk. So I definitely like have that fire in my belly from my own kind of family group. They're all in the language revitalisation space, so that's definitely been handed down. I've got some really deadly aunties, Gimby, Jasley, wouldn't be able to do a lot of the language revitalisation stuff without these amazing people in the space. But I think with respect to elders and language revitalisation, there's a lot of care that needs to be taken in that space. We have a choir, right, and we sing in language with all our young girls and our women, Ngagan Miran, which is the Morning Star Choir. And when we sing for our elders in community, there's a spectrum of emotions that come up, right? So these are elders that weren't able to speak their language, so there's things like anger, or people would just be in tears, crying and coming up to you, and you know, so we have to tread carefully in the space when it comes to language revitalisation, making sure that we bring our elders on the journey with us when it comes to revitalising our language, and that's where I think a lot of the investment does need to be, is with elders in getting them as proficient speakers and feeling strong in their identities again, and being able to pass that down to the young ones.
Thank you. What about you, Kirsty? How are there elders in your community that are inspiring you in the work that you do?
Yeah, so our community wouldn't be where it is today without the work of 5 senior women. Auntie Shirley Ingray, Auntie Clara Mason, my grandmother, Beryl Timbry, Auntie Baronia Williams, and Auntie Gloria Adler. Those 5 women started our journey. They started, you know, they volunteered their time. They spent hours in the state library. They researched our language. They all spoke our language. Without them, we wouldn't have the Gujaga Childcare. We wouldn't have the Gujaga Foundation. So the kids actually at Gujaga Childcare, they were going home speaking language to their parents, and their parents couldn't understand what they were saying. So that's why the Gujaga Foundation actually came along to run those community classes, to run more classes within our education settings. They, without those women and those elders, we wouldn't be this far along in our language journey. We still have a lot to go, but without those women, yeah, our community would be a lot different.
Yeah. Do you feel that language and the sense of connection to identity and place has created stronger, healthier community?
Yeah, definitely. We also have a youth program at La Perouse within our community. All our community organisations sort of join forces. We keep them strong in culture, we keep them strong in language, we keep them from, you know, that antisocial behaviour, and they're able to succeed in their own culture and language and identity.
And do you think that language and culture does play a big part in diverting some of those behaviours? I know, like, you're not...
Yeah, definitely.
just from a community perspective.
No, it does. We've seen a huge difference in our community just in the past 10 years, from that antisocial behaviour to where we are now. And that's, again, off the back of those old girls as well.
Yeah. That's, yeah. I love... I mean, you know it, like as a black person, you do know, growing up, if you haven't necessarily had, you haven't been in close proximity to cultural practices or your country or your language and all of that stuff, and you feel it deep within who you are. yeah, when you come in contact with communities, people's families that are deeply embedded in that space and have access to all of the wonderful things that come along with having access to those things, you do see a notable difference in the happiness and the healthiness of those people. I just think it's beautiful. I notice it. I know that we've got a lot of data now and studies and research that support what we've always known, which is having these things in our lives just makes us happier people, and it helps us stay away from all the bad lifestyle choices that we can sometimes make. So I think that's really beautiful. Yeah. I'm just going to check if I've got any more questions, but I think I want to stop asking questions, and I really want to go to our audience, because we have got an amazingly patient audience with us tonight, and see if you've got any questions for any of our panel members, whether it's broadly for all of them or you've got a specific question for an individual up here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, look, it's wonderful discussion, and I have impression that access to archives is a big issue, and I try to learn a little bit about the practicality of it. So I wanted to ask all the panel persons. I don't want to simplify it too much, but it seems to me that often the content of archival material could be First Nations, and yet all the indexing and keywords would be not. So they would relate to academics or to who recorded what and where and so on. And I just wonder, is it a matter of a goodwill, or is that technicality, or is it the are there tools that are allowed to change the indexing relatively well? And I'm sort of referring a little bit to this archival, decolonization of archives, which really fascinates me very much, and I would like to learn about it. And so I wonder what the panelists think about this issue. Is that bad will of the policymakers, or is that a technical problem that is so, as we talk about it, a little bit difficult to tackle?
Yeah, I completely, and I think I can see Nathan.
Nathan's like, I've got this one.
This is his one, but it definitely is. It's the decolonising Western records and like the deep systemic.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's always bad will, but it has bad effects. So, and I guess Stan works at the Australian Museum. I previously worked with Stan, and because one of the stories I talk about when I first came to the Australian Museum, it was beautiful, but it was also kind of like eye-opening at the same time. We used to have a rainforest shield in the lobby, and I was like, that's really cool that the first thing you see is this beautiful shield. But you'd go up there, you'd go up to it, and it would be like this beautiful shield, and you'd be like, oh, I'd love to learn more about it. And it'd be like, this shield was collected from far north Queensland, made of wood, maker unknown. This shield was collected by Dr. Walter Roth, who's the protector of Aborigines in Queensland, and it became this whole bio of Dr. Walter Roth. And I think I don't actually think that was from ill will. I think it was from a potential bias situation and also a lack of information, because when you only have what you have in, like, I guess, for the Australian Museum, like EMU, and a lot of places have different database systems, and it's like, you only have the information you have, so you really need mob there to reinterpret it. And I guess it goes back to, and Gulwanyang mentioned one of the systems that I think is pretty good, like Auslang, just trying to incorporate, just so things are interpreted the way mob would interpret them, or catalogued, I guess, indexed the way mob would index them, so they can eventually search your records and pull up lots of things. But I guess it's still that issue of getting to the granular thing. And I guess one of the good things, and it's again a resourcing issue, is we have a lot of mob in these spaces now, which has made some of the access easier if other mob know that we exist. Again, there's a because I was talking to a friend who just recently went to Europe, and they were just touring museums to try and find mob stuff, like sort of UN stuff and European. And they didn't really plan it ahead. They were just in Europe and they decided to go to museums. And so many of them said, no, you need to give us 4 weeks notice before you can access this material. Or some of them just straight up say, we don't provide, that's not on display, and we don't provide behind the scenes access. And it did make me feel a little bit better about the Powerhouse, because we probably would have like a 1-day turnaround. If a mob fellow, like if someone was in town and they messaged me on Facebook and said, we're at the Powerhouse tomorrow, I would figure out a way to get them into the collections if I could. Yeah. But also, again, that there is a barrier in the sense that people need to know that I exist and that I work there, and that's sometimes a challenge, so yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I answer your question?
I think also with respect to sense making of the materials, it really needs to be led by First Nations people or done with First Nations people. I know in the language revitalisation context, there's a huge risk when non-Indigenous people are interpreting these materials. And if they're not working with community or being led by community, you're almost ending up with colonised versions again of your own language.
Yeah.
And we see this with respect to our dictionaries and stuff, right? So a very simple example, we've got some documented words for north, south, east, west, but that's not how we navigated country, right? So our word for east actually means down in our language, but it's documented as east. So when Uncle Eddie and he was being recorded, he was saying bara, he's actually meaning, he was pointing towards the ocean, and that's of the river direction towards the ocean, but he's saying down. And waka is up in the mountains, that's up. But if you're on the west coast, that's opposite, isn't it? So like even the interpretation of these materials and sense making, and I think we need to work a lot on data linkages in our cataloguing systems as well. So do we change subject terms when they talk about natives, blacks, Aborigines, and they're quite derogatory in nature, or do we keep them because it is a form of truth telling, this is how we were documented as a people, but do we link it in the back end of these cataloguing systems? So if I come to the catalogue and I just type in First Nations, that net that gets cast actually picks up on all of those terms without, obviously traumatising me in the process. But, I think we need to invest a lot more in data linkages in the back end as well. And I think with the potential of AI and a lot of other stuff coming in now, there's some useful tools that will actually be able to help us do that if we lean into them now. Yeah.
I also think that we need to look at the archives through a cultural lens. These records weren't written by us. They were written by colonists, which often have misinterpretations, as you both mentioned. For example, when James Cook and his crew first sailed into Gamay, which is Botany Bay, they heard the words Warra Warra Wai from our Gweagal warriors. They assumed that meant go away. But by giving our community access to those records, we were able to fix that misinterpretation. The word warra in our language refers to, it's a root word for either white or dead. What our warriors on the shore of Gundul were saying were, you all are dead. It relates to one of our dreaming stories where our spirits come back as low-lying clouds. So if we're able to look through our archives as through a cultural lens, it can fix a lot of this misinterpretations of what has become our history.
Yeah, I think in like my short time sort of being in this space in a more deeper way, my experience coming from the Trust and reaching out to the cultural institutions that we've been working with, there's definitely a willingness to want to build the connection in terms of what's happening in this space, and I think we've banged on about it a lot throughout our discussion. It's the resourcing. We need the workforce. We need to build the numbers of people. We need to make sure that the spaces we're creating and the roles that we're creating for mob in cultural institutions have those additional wraparound services and programs that they're going to need to make sure that they can stay in these spaces for a long time, because I imagine the work that happens when you're working in records and archives can be tiring over a period. Constantly being the voice of decolonisation could probably be lonely when you don't have a team to support you in doing it. So more resources, people. More resources, more bodies in the space, and more investment, ongoing investment into the work of communities, because they're the ones doing that work.
And I think more collaboration across institutions. We need to be working together a whole lot more. So often, like when we're pouring through the Colonial Secretary records, we might find a letter and it might mention a language material or cultural material, and that's actually held by State Library or it's held over here with Oz Museum. So how do we partner, and when we go back to community and give those digitised materials back, how do we give the whole story back and not just that portion of it? Or at least point them in the right direction, so we can reduce, again, that burden of around resourcing.
I think it would be great if we could find the solution, right, to kind of remove that massive barrier for community around them having to kind of chase the bits and pieces down. If we can kind of lean in and pave the way and make it easier, and would be much better. I guess, much better experience for mob wanting to go on this journey. Hey. Oh.
The various ages, I'm assuming the school teachers, including the adults, do you engage in outdoor teaching, and perhaps do you find the spoken language easier to teach as opposed to the written form?
It's much easier. We focus on early childhood and primary school. We're developing a curriculum for high school. But as of now, most of our content is through play. That's how we find our kids learn best, is through play, through actions, through songs as well. Yeah.
It's beautiful. That's a really good question. We actually do that in a number of different ways. So we do things like language engineering, where we might create language. So for things that exist today, like say a plane, going juku, big bird. We need to be able to describe what's around us today for our languages to be living, for our kids to be using these languages as well. So we do language engineering, we do borrowing as well. So because we have a lot of shared language with bordering nations or language groups, there are a lot of common words. Even when it comes to like camp, ngura, guna, when you go to the toilet, certain things, even food, like certain kind of survival terms, I guess, because when we were frequenting other people's countries, we had a lot of these shared terms going through, right? Because you need to know where you're going to sleep, where you're going to eat, where you're going to... So borrowing isn't out of the question, and sometimes like with Gatang, for instance, where Birapai, Watamai and Guringai mob, right, So a lot of the southern mob, they might lean more towards Hunter River Lake Macquarie language for their borrowing, whereas up in the northern Biripi part of the footprint, we might lean more to Dungutty, because we have a lot more shared words up there. So it just depends on the geography, and we're a multilingual people. Like, we often weren't just speaking our own languages, but a mix of languages across geographical areas. So I don't think, even if Paul Callum, like with respect to Anawan and just the minimal kind of word list that they're working with at the moment, you know, there are solutions to be able to borrow and be able to complete language.
Does that work with the sentence structures and things as well?
Yeah, so you can, well, we lean on, because Gulwanyang are so kind of advanced with respect to language revitalisation, we tend to copy the methods by which they've revitalised a word or put language to something, right? So if they've already done some language engineering, we're like, oh, how did you do that? What words did you put together? How did you think about that? What was the cultural lens that you applied? And because we're both saltwater coastal mob, like we've got similar context, like it makes sense. I wouldn't go and borrow something off, you know, in a desert mob or western mob, because it would be out of context. Yeah. Hi.
I think Kirsty touched on this a bit before, just the whole panel. With decolonising language, obviously archival work's been very important in revitalising language, but do any of you see a future for language, or even want a future for language, in which written language is no longer a necessary part of it?
Yeah, I want to walk down the street. I want to hear people speak in my language or my country. Absolutely, that's exactly what we want.
But like, even like propagation and spreading, like, is it going forward? Is it irreducible now, just with how deeply seated Western influence is here, or can you visualise that future?
Well, languages are they're communicative, right?
Yeah.
We need to be able to communicate with each other, and they evolve over time. They're influenced over time by various kind of things, and we've got to accept that. And I just think, you know, speaking to each other in a communicative way on a daily basis, like I want to walk down the street and hear people speak my language or my country. That's the pie in the sky type stuff. That's where we see ourselves in the next, you know, 10 years, 20 years or generations, whatever that kind of looks like. And we're willing to put, like Claire said, we're willing to do the hard work with or without the resources.
I think it'd be wonderful when we start referring to all our neighbourhoods with the correct language.
Funny you should say that. We've found some amazing Crown land maps with a lot of place names on them, so we're really looking forward to being able to give them back to community. Some of those finds have been incredibly rich, like, you know, they've documented headlands from here all the way up to the Tweed in language, like, just, yeah, so much that is sitting in there that we're really looking forward to digitising and getting back to community.
Growing up with it, that's what they're going to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, does someone up the back?
Sort of touching on it now, but to speak to a bit more of the broader objectives of language, aside from just driving education and disseminating information through communities and, you know, bringing that Aboriginal voice back into everyday practice, what are some of the, it's probably a question for you to speak more broadly on some of the more long-term objectives of your practice and where you see that going, perhaps in respect to biocultural practice or, you know, agriculture, and what your sort of interactions are with that at the moment. You're all sort of very much involved in an academic capacity, but perhaps what your thoughts are more broadly of the longer term relationship between your work and what effect it will have.
Do you want to go?
Oh, sure. So in my community, although we are strong in language, we don't have any fluent speakers. Probably the most person with the most knowledge about language is Raymond Ingray. He says he's not fluent because he can't communicate fluently with another person. We want our children to be able to speak fluently within the next 20, 30 years. That's our goal. Yeah.
We want a languages sector. I want my kids to grow up and know that they could have a job in education, they could have a job in health working with language. like language roles in these institutions, in these settings where we're actually growing positions. They're not just, you know, in language delivery and education, like it's in justice, it's in, you know, all these other spaces as well. I want those economic opportunities for my kids to be able to participate in a languages sector, and we need to build that. And I think we're really on the front foot in New South Wales because of the Act, because of the establishment of the Languages Trust. We're well on our way in New South Wales to building it. I think the only thing we're kind of missing in New South Wales is maybe a peak body to work in partnership with a trust that supports like a lot of us kind of on the ground as well. But that's what I want to see. I want to see language sectors built, and because with tourism, cultural tourism, you know, it's really up there in terms of generating, you know, economic value here in Australia. Why are we not leveraging off culture? Why are we not leveraging off languages and really, you know, propping up that space?
Yeah, and I guess I would be the same. I guess mostly fluency. I'd love to be able to hear language more and have my nieces and nephews be able to speak language, and even to think in language. I'd love to do that, and also to just like understand my language more, to just understand like I guess country more and Wiradjuri philosophies. I recently was in Bathurst, and there was an uncle there, Uncle Lloyd Doylan, who was talking about the terminology like Nadi, which a lot of people will say is mine. So it'll be like Nadi Bundi, that means mine Bundi. But that's how like Colin sort of wrote it. And Uncle Lloyd was telling us that it actually means from me. And it was like, he was trying to explain how like in Wiradjuri you don't actually say mine, you kind of say, no, like it comes from me, but I don't own it. Like, and just like learning little words, like words and ideas around that, you know, helping me change my worldview. And we've been yarning about decolonizing, and I got to, you know, decolonize my own mind, because I went through the, you know, the Western education system. I grew up not learning Wiradjuri, so like those sorts of things help, I guess, you know, change my own views and my own relationship to country in Nurrumbung. Yeah.
So someone.
Oh yeah, that was me. I'm not sure if anyone here's been to Nuka Language School in Southern Arnhem. It's this awesome language school that exists up there. And interestingly, a lot of the Creole words in Nuka have a lot of East Coast words up there, because of obviously there was that move north, and a lot of the settlers used words from down here, assuming that Aboriginal people up there would use, you know, speak the same language. So I guess it kind of goes back to this idea of a peak sector, and to what extent are different jurisdictions talking to each other and kind of drawing on the different kind of language and knowledge and how that can strengthen the sector more broadly.
Yeah, I think Gulwanyang mentioned the various hats that she wears in this space, and at the kind of federal national level, under the Closing the Gap Target 16 around languages and strengthening and growing languages, there is a national languages policy partnership group. So it consists of the states and territories, government representation. It's supposed to be at its highest level, or high up enough for decision making. And so Gulwanyang sits on that panel, that group as a community representative. The Aboriginal Languages Trust sits there as the government representative, and then you'll have CAPO representatives there, and it's represented across Australia. I think from that experience, we see that New South Wales is definitely miles ahead of where other jurisdictions in Australia are, and it seems to largely be attributed to the legislation coming through in 2017, and it really provided that springboard for setting up the kind of mechanism around ensuring it's literally the objective of the Act is a focused and sustained and coordinated effort on languages. And I think so often you will see language conflated with culture, conflated with other things. And yes, culture runs through everything and language runs through everything. But the mob in New South Wales who were kind of championing, who were advocating for the creation of a dedicated language legislation knew that needs a crystal focus language if we're going to turn around where it's at the moment and bring it back. It can't be muddied in with anything else. And what we're seeing is that because of the foresight of mob in New South Wales who were fighting for that legislation to get through and could see that this would be a real critical turning point, and the work that the platform it's given mob in New South Wales in terms of establishing the trust and allowing us to kind of point to something and say this legislation now needs to be honoured, and you honour that through giving resources to what it is that community needs to help them keep doing the vital work that they're doing. And I feel like, in terms of like some of what's going on across the different jurisdictions is, feels a little bit sad that they don't have that sort of the government backing in behind the work that they're trying to do.
I see a lot of potential in that language policy partnership space as a community representative, like sitting at the table with the big wigs with respect to all the jurisdictions and kind of telling them what the needs are actually on the ground and setting some priorities. I think out of that we've been able to set 7 clear priorities, one of which is legislation for the other jurisdictions and maybe even exploring national legislation with respect to languages as well. But there are other key priorities, right? And I think First Languages Australia are leading kind of a bit of a national sector strengthening plan at the moment that kind of looks at it, in a much larger sort of scale. So it's really exciting time to be in the languages space. I hope my kids want to be in it too, as much as I am doing this work.
I do really feel though the learning across different jurisdictions is done at a community level. I can't emphasise more. It's look like every time you see mob get together who are like doing work in this space, like I said, their willingness to share and learn from one another and thrive in what's going on. The learning is to be done at that level, I think, and we just need to, when I say we, government, I'm just step back, listen, hear what it is that community needs to let them get on with the job of getting their languages revived and reclaimed and resource them to do that and just get the hell out of the way, really. I'll go to one more question and then we might wrap up. Oh, we've got a couple. I'll do 2 more. 2 more.
Maybe just quickly, can I get the panel to share their thoughts on the importance of place naming and maybe a bit about how we get it right?
Well, it needs to come from community first. Like I said, there's a lot of potential with respect to archival material and those documented place names. Prior to the other names being given, there was heavy documentation of those existing names. So I think it sits with community in terms of decision making. I know that there's a bit of place naming strategies kind of happening with respect to government at the moment, and a lot more in that kind of space. But have you done much around place naming stuff, Nate?
No, our community's done a lot with, naming places. It's a bit tricky for us though. In our community, places change over time. For example, we have a word Barnaby. It means a place of fresh water. Around this area, just down at Circular Quay, there was a freshwater stream. That was Barnaby. It's no longer Barnaby because the stream has dried up. So it is a bit tricky. It changes over time, but as long as you're going to the right people in community, you'll get a good outcome.
And up the back, last call.
So you've all done an incredible amount of work in archives and language, and Jean's told me everything I know about.
She's one of my students in my TAFE class. Hey.
But my question to, I guess, all of you was, is there a plan to make some of your research and some of your understanding of public knowledge, and if so, and public record, and if you want that, how do you make sure that that's safe for mob to access first and in
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I guess like even like this panel tonight is kind of trying to do that. And one of the things that actually, one of the reasons why I'm called the archival decolonist, which I did steal from a Native American fellow who just one day said that he wrote in one of these articles saying that all archivists should be archival decolonists, and I was like, that should be my job. But I because I'm known for it because I started a blog called The Archival Decolonist, and that was just a way for me to get be more accessible and get things that I saw lots of mobs struggling with in this sector, and try to yarn to it and give voice. And I think we also yarned a little bit about our own personal practices in terms of museums, and I also think we need to be transparent about that stuff too. So I think I think you gave the example before of like records that have like slurs in their titles and stuff, for example. If we do decide to change that, we need to be transparent about that and what the record used to be and why we've decided to make that decision. So I guess one thing that we do is, I guess for the Powerhouse, for example, one of the things we do is we've got our Indigenous intellectual cultural property protocols online for everyone to access, like so everyone can read it, and mob can read it and basically say, well, these are your own protocols, so you better be doing this. And similarly with our repatriation policy, we have a repatriation policy that we will repatriate anything that community deem culturally significant that needs to be on country. We will repatriate it, and we have that policy, accessible. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I just want to thank you, panel. Thank you. It's been really insightful, as I knew it would be, and really great to be able to sit here and shoot these yarns with you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to all of the amazing stuff that's going to happen as you keep moving forward. Congratulations on your 12 months again. And thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, have a lovely night.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.